talk about elements of the seas, which are mostly governed by laws of commerce and admiralty or maritime law. However, starting out, we're going to look at certain signs that we are returning to a older period when things were freer but also more chaotic. And when we look at current circumstances, we find a strange pattern of events, and we're going to start this out by looking at an article from the Navy Times about a Buddhist flag being flown aboard a ship for the first time, which of course is very important. And quote, a Buddhist pennant appeared on a Navy ship earlier this week for the first time in the sea's service history, the Navy announced. The blue and white flag became one of the 4 official Navy religious pennants after U.S. Fleet Forces Command Chaplain Captain Brian Stamm put the banner into service in August. Of course, the interesting part is that the flag was flown above the so-called Stars and Stripes. Next, we look at the government of the Netherlands and their Merchant Shipping Protection Act. Dutch merchant ships will be able to protect themselves more effectively against piracy in the Gulf of Aden in the future. Under the Merchant Shipping Protection Act that enters into force on the 1st of February 2022, ship managers will be allowed, under certain conditions, to deploy armed private security guards. And protecting Dutch merchant shipping from piracy, the authorities of the Netherlands seek to protect Dutch merchant ships more effectively against piracy in the Gulf of Aden, if necessary, and on request, security for merchant shipping vessels is currently provided by military personnel posted to a vessel protection detachment of the Ministry of Defense. Dutch merchant ships allowed to use private guards. As of 1st of February 2022, maritime security companies can apply for a permit to provide security services. Once the first permit has been issued, ship managers may apply to the Coast Guard for permission to deploy armed private security guards on board under following conditions. The ship qualifies for military protection by a Vessel Protection Detachment, VPD. Ministry of Defense is unable to supply a VPD or to supply one in good time. The ship would have to travel too far to obtain a VPD. A VPD team would cost disproportionately far more than a team of armed private security guards, and the private security guards will be deployed only in the Gulf of Aden off of Somalia. Ship managers will only be allowed to employ security guards from companies granted a permit for this purpose by the Human Environment and Transportation Inspectorate, ILT. The ILT has granted a permit to a maritime security company. Ship managers may apply to the Coast Guard for permission to deploy armed private security guards on board. Only merchant vessels sailing under the Dutch flag that meet the conditions will be granted permission. Ship managers must request permission from the Coast Guard for each shipping route on which they seek to deploy security guards. Of course, that is a very interesting twist, but other events also speak to a pattern of occurrences that demonstrate the aforementioned theory. Danish training ship hits LCS USS Minneapolis-St. Paul in Baltimore Harbor, and this is brought to us by USNI News. A Danish training ship hit one of the U.S. Navy's littoral combat ships in the Baltimore Inner Harbor on Sunday. USNI News has learned the Royal Danish Navy's Danmark hit USS Minneapolis-St. Paul LCS-21 while the Freedom class LCS was moored at the Baltimore Pier for Fleet Week. And moored means attached to something like a dock or buoy or maybe another ship. No U.S. sailors were injured during the incident, according to the Navy. Video of the incident shows the jibboom of the sailing ship crunching into the bow of the LCS. Next, we look at an article by Naval Technology. The USS Navy decommissions littoral combat ship USS Coronado, which was commissioned in 2014 at Naval Air Station North Island. Now, the U.S. Navy has decommissioned its Independence class littoral combat ship USS Coronado LCS-4 at Naval Base San Diego in California. The decommissioning of the vessel was marked by a ceremony conducted on 14th of September. LCS-4 was constructed by Austal USA at its facility in Mobile, Alabama. It entered service with the U.S. Navy in April 2014 at Naval Air Station North Island. After decommissioning, LCS-4 will now be designated as out of commission in reserve OCIR asset, while its crew will receive follow-on orders for resuming new assignments. Expeditionary Strike Group 3 Commander Rear Admiral Wayne Bays said, "Today we recognize the great contribution Coronado and its crew made in development of operational concepts foundational to current configuration and deployment of..." Next, when we look at the UN outfit pretending to be US based, the US Border Forces, that is the so-called Customs and Border Protection, are seizing Americans' phone data and storing it for 15 years. This is from 15 Minute News, but also is taken from a different source called Engadget. If a traveler's phone, tablet, or computer ever gets searched at an airport, American border authorities could add data from their device to a massive database that can be accessed by thousands of government officials. Now, the government officials they're referring to there are probably the ones that have no authority to do this sort of thing. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, leaders have admitted to lawmakers in a briefing that its officials are adding information to a database from as many as 10,000 devices every year. The Washington Post reports. Further, 2,700 CBP officers can access the database without warrant and without having to record the purpose of their search. These details were revealed in a letter Senator Ron Wyden wrote to CBP Commissioner. Very interesting. Next, the USS Albany visits Gibraltar. 30th December 2021. So this is a little bit of past news. Albany, assigned to Commander Submarine Force Atlantic, is currently operating under the command and control of Commander Task Force 69 to complement the undersea warfare capabilities of U.S. 6th Fleet. USS Albany's operations in the European theater highlight the importance of undersea warfare and our commitment to allies and partners in the region, and blah blah, blah 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 blah. But the important part about all of these different articles is that they demonstrate a clear pattern of events that happened once before in history. Now, when we come to the year that a certain man called Barry ended up passing into the netherworld, if a search is done online, you will run into the work of scrubbing. However, many that look back on the year 2011 will remember it as the year of the Arab Spring, but another event that happened is probably forgotten in many minds of people that lived through it, and that was the alleged or unalleged hit against a certain Barry. And of course, in this website, the question is asked and answered, and no further research is necessary. And if you go to other websites, you will find that they have either been removed, and that there's very few sources that talk about this subject, probably because of censorship. But there is one source that says that Fox News, so-called news, was hacked. More like made a not-so-accidental accident. But to avoid the censorship or tripping something, the hit that shall not be named will be referred to as Barry. And that particular person in 2011 also announced that a conveniently similarly named person, whose existence in reality is questionable, was suspiciously taken out at the same time. And then when we go to the same year, there's a Wikipedia article, and the other subsequent years are interesting, but specifically this year, there was an incident where a particular boat was suspiciously lost, shall we say. And that particular boat has a ironically named title of the MV Spice Islander 1. And that was done off the coast of Tanzania, previously called Zanzibar, which has a very interesting history. And the name of the ship is extremely convenient, or coincidental, shall we say. Also in that year, the, shall we say, invasion under UN command of Libya happened. Among the suppression of anti-government sentiment known as the Arab Spring, but which was an event that bears similar resemblance to the current treatment of US citizens for their, quote, political leanings. And then also in the same year, we find a movement of funds, likely extrapolated from the US, China, and other countries through coercion, force, theft, taxation, the usual fees and whatnot, and that gets correlated into the funneled through the subsidiaries and correlated into the Central European Union, passed to it probably from the UN, and then they proposed a rescue bill, 1780 billion for Portugal, which that being done with that country is very telling. Portugal is a interesting history, as we'll find out later. And then the bailout loan will be, I guess was, equally split between the European Financial Stabilization Mechanism, European Financial Stability Facility, and the International Monetary Fund, all of which are simply mechanisms to launder or move ill-gotten gains, shall we say, or funding for conquest and control efforts. And then in the same year, in October 2007, an emergency meeting in Brussels was announced with the European Union announcing an agreement to tackle the sovereign debt crisis, which I believe would correlate to the Vatican, considering the European sovereign debt crisis, and the only true sovereign in Europe is the Pope. And that includes a write-down of 50% Greek bonds and bailout, the usual type of stuff. Movement of funds and things to aid. When we look at the history of this, we have to look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, conveniently named UN CLOSE. There should actually be an E on the end of that, but I guess they couldn't add the E in the acronym. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea was adopted in 1982. It lays down a comprehensive regime of law and order in the world's oceans and seas, establishing rules governing all uses of the oceans and their resources. It embodies in one instrument traditional rules for the uses of the oceans, and at the same time introduces new legal concepts and regimes and addresses new concerns. The convention also provides the framework for further development of specific areas of the law and then we look at a different article, and this is talking about, or I guess on the side of the UN CLOSE 1982, the right of innocent passage in the UN Convention. Notice that word, the right. Whose right of innocent passage? And then they explain the UN's definition of innocent passage. Innocent passage under UN CLOSE and exploration of the tenets, trials, and tribulations. Abstract. The right of innocent passage in territorial waters available to ships of any state is perhaps among the most contested of the regimes under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, with possibly the widest range of interpretation and implementation and an abundant inconsistency between theory and state practice. This chapter explores the varied tenets and facets of the regime of innocent passage, and along the way also examines the multifarious trials and tribulations to which the regime is subjected around the globe. This was published on 21st of January 2020 by, as part of the WMU Studies in Maritime Affairs, and by somebody named Anish Hebar, allegedly. But while it appears that the article is arguing against, it is actually for the UN close doctrine, because there is very few, or are very few outlets that do not all share the same perspective, considering we live in the age of UN enforced propaganda. And when they define innocent passage, we find a similar explanation of an old doctrine, very old doctrine, but quote, passage of a foreign ship shall be considered to be prejudicial to the peace, good order, or security of the coastal state, meaning not innocent passage, if in the territorial sea it engages in any threat or use of force against the sovereign, territorial integrity, or political independence of the coastal state, or in any other manner in violation of the principles of international law embodied in the Charter of the United Nations. Any exercise or practice with weapons of any kind, known as exercise or practice with weapons of any kind, that is called the right to keep and bear arms. Any act aimed at collecting information to the prejudice of the defense or security of the coastal state. Any act of propaganda aimed at affecting the defense or security of the coastal state. And of course, in that context, anything against their propaganda would be, in fact, considered propaganda. And the launching, landing, or taking on board of any aircraft, the launching, landing, or taking on board of any military device, the loading or unloading of any commodity, currency, or person contrary to the customs, fiscal, immigration, or sanitary laws and regulations of the coastal state. Any act of willful and serious pollution contrary to this convention, any fishing activities, the carrying out of research or survey activities, any act aimed at interfering with any systems of communication or other facilities or installations of the coastal state, any other activity not having a direct bearing on passage. Now, this definition, in so many words, is stating the doctrine of you are either with us or you are against us. And this is a very old doctrine that comes from Mare Nostrum. No surprise, Latin for our sea, and it is a Roman concept. Imagine where a certain sovereign state is located. And it was a common Roman name for the Mediterranean Sea. The term was always somewhat ambiguous. It both implied Roman dominance of the Mediterranean and the cultural diversity of the nations that have bordered it for well over 2 millennia. Since before the Roman times, the Mediterranean Sea always was a meeting ground for cultures that bordered it, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not. And the rest of that is just hocus pocus garbage, as usual. But if we go to Wikipedia, we can get a little bit more clarification on this idea, and it shows in the Roman usage the term Mare Nostrum originally was used by the ancient Romans to refer to the Tyrrhenian Sea after their conquest of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica during the Punic Wars with Carthage. By 30 BC, Roman dominion had extended from the Iberian Peninsula to Egypt, and Mare Nostrum began to be used in the context of the whole Mediterranean Sea. Other names were also employed, including Mare Internum, internal sea, but they did not include Mare Mediterraneum, which was a late Latin creation that was attested to only well after the fall of Rome. Of course, Rome never fell, so that is a twisting there. Roman Empire is still around today. And in the Italian nationalist usage, in the decades following 1861 unification of Italy, Italian nationalists who saw Italy as a successor state to the Roman Empire attempted to rival the term. Now, they're using the term Italian nationalists. What they should actually be using is Italian social nationalists, which they're clearly omitting for obvious propaganda purposes. In particular, the rise of Italian nationalism during the scramble for Africa of the 1880s led to calls for the establishment of an Italian colonial empire, which introduced for the first time a renewed and modern concept of Mare Nostrum. Of course, the UN close of 1982 solidified that. Even if the coast of Tripoli were a desert, even if it were not supported one peasant or one Italian business firm, we still need to take it to avoid being suffocated in Mare Nostrum, Emilio Lupi. And then this also states that it was used by Benito Mussolini and other socialist fascist regimes. And in the earlier document that was pretending to argue against this clause, it notes two things that are important, two important concepts for this. One is Mare Liberum, according to this, which literally means the free sea is the principle that the seas are international territory and all nations are free to use it for seafaring trade. It was published in 1609 by the Dutch jurist and philosopher Hugo Grotius. Of course, this explanation here is incredibly propagandistic, and it is obfuscating or misrepresenting what exactly is the concept of Mare Liberum, which we will get into a little bit further. And then the second concept is Mare Clausum, note, Clausum, or closed. And it's John Selden's rebuttal to Hugo Grotius' Mare Liberum, and argues that a sea, ocean, or other navigable body of water is under an exclusive jurisdiction of a state and closed or inaccessible to other states. Now that's, of course, also incorrect, and Mare Clausum was specifically part of Roman doctrine Mare Nostrum and meant closed sea, and it was when they closed their sea that they would put Mare Clausum. So this article is clearly obfuscating the terms on purpose. But interestingly, if we look up Mare Nostrum project, we will find this. The concept of the Mare Nostrum communication platform was launched by MGI in 2005 during the IMTM, Mediterranean Institute of Maritime Transport's symposium in Barcelona. The Mare Nostrum communication platform serves the ports and airports in the Mediterranean Sea, a border zone with Africa, Asia, and Europe. Shipping and air times are short, which seems to be becoming antinomic with requirements linked to information exchanges regarding security matters and the need for the smooth transit of goods through ports and airports. The objective of this platform is to encourage and facilitate computerized data exchanges between port and airport public and private players in order to reinforce security and trace goods, anticipate and manage the administration of customs processing of shipped goods before their arrival in the port or airport of call. And that's about all you need to know about that, right? No further research necessary. And this all revolves around the threat or warning, depending on which side you're on, of the Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman, Die Vliegende Hollander, in Dutch, De Vliegende Hollander, is a legendary ghost ship alleged never able to make port, but doomed to sail the seven seas forever. And that is exactly what the UN, the Vatican, and all subsidiary entities attempted to, or did, establish as part of the Mare Nostrum. And then in our next event, we look at the Santa Catarina, or Santa Catarina, and Mare Clausum versus Mare Liberum controversy. This is the Wikipedia article. According to this article, the Dutch were at war with Spain and Portugal when Santa Catarina was captured. That part's a little bit debatable, but though Heemskerk did not have authorization from the company or the government to initiate the use of force, many shareholders were eager to accept the riches that he brought back to them. There's another phrase that's obfuscating the truth, but okay. Not only was the legality of keeping the prize questionable under Dutch statute, and there's another one that's Yeah. But a faction of shareholders, mostly Mennonite, in the company also objected to the forceful seizure on moral grounds, and of course the Portuguese demanded the return of their cargo. The scandal led to a public judicial hearing and a wider campaign to sway public and international opinion. It was this wider contest that representatives of the companies called upon jurist Hugo Grotius to draft a polemical, which means controversial. Clearly this writer is a propagandist, defense of the seizure. Grotius sought to ground his defense of the seizure in terms of the natural principles of justice. One chapter of his long theory-laden treatise, notice that, long theory-laden, that doesn't suggest what the perspective of this writer is, entitled De Jure Prede, made it to the press in the form of the influential pamphlet Mare Liberum. They say this is a free sea, but technically that is the liberated sea. Mare Liberum, published in 1609, Grotius adapted the principle originally formulated by Francisco de Vitoria and further developed by Fernando Vasquez de Menchaca, the school of Salamanca, that the sea was international territory against the Portuguese mare clausum, closed sea policy, and all nations were free to use it for seafaring trade. Grotius, by claiming free seas, provided suitable ideological justification for the Dutch breaking up of various trade monopolies through its formidable naval power. England, competing fiercely with the Dutch for domination of world trade, opposed this idea, redefining the mare clausum principles. That is entirely not true, but okay, considering the English used mare liberum for their own establishment of trade. And if we go to the Singapore government agency website, we get propaganda, but a little bit more useful. Santa Catarina incident, 25th February 1603. The Santa Catarina incident refers to the seizure of Portuguese merchant vessel Santa Catarina by the Dutch off the coast of Singapore on 25th February 1603. The ship, fully laden with goods from the ports of Macau and China, was en route to Malacca. It was taken under the laws of war by Dutch Admiral Jacob von Heemskerk with the assistance of the Johorians. So there we get a emphasis on the cooperation with locals and Dutch. And this all stems from the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Treaty of Tordesillas, signed in Tordesillas, Spain on 7th June 1494 and authenticated in Setúbal, Portugal, divided the newly discovered lands outside Europe between the Portuguese Empire and the Spanish Empire, Crown of Castile, along the meridian 370 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands off of the west coast of Africa. That line of demarcation was about halfway between Cape Verde Islands, already Portuguese, and the islands entered by Christopher Columbus on the first voyage, and blah, blah, blah. The rest is just a bunch of propaganda. But this treaty cut out everyone besides Europe, or besides Spain and Portugal, and was at the behest of the Vatican, as per usual. Now, why is Spain and Portugal important? Well, we have to look at the destruction of the Knights Templar to answer that question, and the heavily anti-French king and pope that allegedly destroyed the Knights Templar in the propaganda that you will find online, where there is only one viewpoint and it is all at the benefit of the Knights Templar. Now, why is that? Well, if we go to the Wikipedia article on the history of this, we will look at events in Spain and Portugal. Quote, after the infamous trials of the Knights Templar in France and the subsequent orders of Pope Clement V to dissolve the order, most countries compelled ceding Templar lands to the Hospitallers. That's partially false, but okay. Kings Denis of Portugal and James II of Aragon both proclaimed they found no fault of heresy, blasphemy, or immorality in the Templars in their respective realms. And there you understand why Spain and Portugal were given the world between them, because they gave refuge to the Knights Templar. Now, current modern day look at this. The Jesuits are the revived Knights Templar. This is according to Truth's Journalism blog, but the Jesuits are the revived Knights Templar. The Knights Templar was expelled from the papacy in 1312 by Pope Clement V and fell forth to France Few Templars who escaped went to the powerful kingdom of Aragon and became known as the Order of the Calatrava, who would later align with Montesa. In 1534, a Spanish nobleman by the name of Ignatius Loyola would revive the Templars and call them the Society of Jesus. Now, when we go to a different article and we look at the origin of Ignatius Loyola, the Jesuit Order, or Society of Jesus, also called Jesuits today, was founded by a man named Ignatius of Loyola, born in 1491. Notice that date coincides with certain events. He maintained a military career as a Spanish knight until he was severely wounded at the Battle of Pamplona in 1521. And that part shows you the pattern of events. And then we look at the largest treasure allegedly lost in history, which has a lot of misdirection and strangeness around it. But the lost treasure of Flor de la Mar, which was originally spelled Frol de la Mar, and it probably means sea foam instead of flower of the sea, as they are obfuscating this subject. The Flor de la Mar, or Flor do Mar, meaning flower of the sea, was a Portuguese carrack of 400 tons that sailed the seas during the early 1500s. The ship was carrying a great amount of treasure when it sank somewhere off the coast of Sumatra, possibly at the northern end of the Strait of Malacca during its voyage back to Portugal. And this ship is probably not one ship, but many, all lost because of the Portuguese captains not wanting to admit defeat. And then when we look at some polemic figures in the past, we find Jan Janssen van Haarlem, commonly known as Race Morad the Younger. He was allegedly an Ottoman Dutch pirate in Algeria and Morocco who converted to Islam after being captured by a Moorish state in 1618. He allegedly began serving as a pirate, one of the most famous of the 17th century Sallee rovers, and allegedly died in 1641. And next, when we look at a different character called Jan Huygen van Linschoten, he was born in, coincidence, Haarlem, possibly. And that was in 1563 to the son of a public notary, allegedly. And of course, most of his life reads like a backstory for a fictional character, as most of these do. And then here's the portrait of the alleged Linschoten, or von Haarlem.